Norway, Ireland, and Spain announced that they will recognize an independent Palestinian state. Will other European nations follow suit? And what does this mean for Palestine's efforts to become a full member of the United Nations? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Until now, most Western countries have maintained that they will formally recognize Palestinian statehood only at the end of a peace process with Israel. But after nearly 7 months of Israel's devastating war on Gaza that has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians, Norway, Ireland, and Spain say they won't wait any longer. The Irish Prime Minister drew parallels with his own country's declaration of independence from British rule. But the European Union is divided on the issue, and larger powers like France say it's not the right time to recognize a Palestinian state. And a U.S. veto still holds back Palestine's bid to gain full membership at the United Nations. So what does this increasing recognition of Palestinian statehood mean? We'll put that to our guests in a moment. First, though, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Palestine, to be recognized as an independent state from the 28th of May by at least 3 more European countries.
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision.
But on the ground, Israel has stepped up its bombardment across Gaza, a war that has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians and reduced much of the Strip to rubble.
Recognition of Palestine is in support of moderate forces that are on a retreating front in a protracted and cruel conflict. This is an investment in the only solution that can bring lasting peace in the Middle East, a two-state solution.
Adding that the two-state solution is best for both Palestinians and Israelis, and this is the only way to ensure peace in the region. And the demarcation line should be from the Armistice Agreement of 1949, with Jerusalem as the shared capital. It's thought other European countries will join suit, including Slovenia and Malta. Israel has responded with anger. It immediately recalled its ambassadors from Norway and Ireland.
Israel will not remain silent in the face of those undermining its sovereignty and endangering its security. Today's decision sends a message to the Palestinians and the world. Terrorism pays. These countries chose to reward Hamas and Iran by recognizing a Palestinian state.
While Palestinian officials have welcomed the decision.
I think I would be speaking on behalf of all Palestinian people in welcoming this wonderful act. It is a very important step in determining the right of the Palestinian people, our people, for self-determination. And also it is a blow-up, it blows away a lot of the de facto facts that Israel has created through settlement building on the ground, confirming that Palestine today is a state under occupation.
The top prosecutor at the International Criminal Court is requesting arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and Defence Minister for the war on Gaza. He's also seeking warrants for the arrest of the top Hamas leaders for the October 7th attack on Israel. Reactions among Western leaders have been split on this, with the US and UK speaking out against the move, while the European Union says the ICC must be respected. Wednesday's decision by the European nations to recognise Palestine could create a split among Western allies and within major international organisations. But it gives Palestine another victory in its long journey to achieve full statehood. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. In Tel Aviv, Yossi Beilin, a former Israeli cabinet minister who initiated the Oslo peace process in 1992. In Barcelona, Julien Barnes-Dacey directs the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And in Deganwy in the UK, Conn Ross, a former British diplomat assigned to the United Nations, who resigned and founded the non-profit advisory group Independent Diplomat. A warm welcome to all of you. Yossi, I want to start with you. The Israeli government sees this as a deeply hostile move. as if recognizing Palestinian statehood somehow diminished Israel. Does it?
No. No way. I mean, had you asked me, I would have recognized this state too. I believe that there is no other and there is no better solution for both peoples than to have a two-state solution. In my view, it should be under an umbrella of a confederation of two independent and sovereign states. But the two-state solution is the basis for any solution between the two peoples, as long as you want to have a solution. If you don't want to have a solution, then no solution is acceptable by you. But to say that it is hurting Israel, I don't see how.
Why do you mention this idea of if you don't want a solution? Are you implying that the Israeli government doesn't want a solution?
There is no question that there are actually lunatics in this government. Not all of them, of course, but there is a group of lunatics which is holding all the others by their necks. And they, of course, are against any solution with the Palestinians. And they do not allow any development.
Con Ross, as a former diplomat, you once worked, we said it, at the UN. What you actually did at the time, and you've explained this on your Substack, was to try and increase Palestine's status at the United Nations. It was part of your diplomatic efforts there. So based on that experience, you woke up today and saw this news of recognition of Palestinian statehood, and you thought what?
I thought it was a positive step. I think it diminishes the diplomatic space for Israel. It shows very clearly that Israel's actions in Gaza have reduced its diplomatic credibility, have made it more isolated in the world. All of that is very positive. And I think it moves us towards a conversation about what kind of solution long-term there might be for the Israel-Palestine situation. It also underlines in my own mind that the only thing that will work to move Israel towards that kind of solution is international pressure, and serious international pressure, much, much more than we have seen up until now.
Julien, I want to ask you whether this recognition is going to build momentum for more recognition, but allow me a little bit of a preamble, some facts for our viewers here, because it's not the first time, far from it, that countries have made this kind of move. In fact, 143 of the 193 member states of the United Nations already recognize Palestine. Norway, Spain, and Ireland added to that group, that will be 146. Palestine is a member also of many international organizations, including UNESCO, the International Criminal Court, and Interpol. And this month, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to back Palestine's bid for a full membership. But the US has consistently blocked it at the Security Council. So at the moment, Palestine remains a non-member UN observer state. That's its status. So back to that question. Does this recognition of statehood by 3 European countries at the same time, does that build momentum for more recognition?
Clearly reflects a direction of travel, as you said in the lead up there. There has been a whole series of kind of steps taken towards different levels of recognition. This is 3 quite important European countries coming out now, on top of the 9 EU member states that already recognize Palestine. I think it's very important that you have countries like France and even the UK putting this on the table now. I think there are others like Belgium and Slovenia in the EU who are also thinking of this decision. So clearly, there is a lot of thinking about this. There is a recognition that something needs to change. The parties on the ground are stuck. The situation is kind of brutally entrenched in conflict, and there's a need to kind of establish a new equation. I think the real question is what comes alongside this. Sure, we have more European states move in this direction. We see a large chunk of the global south more actively pushing for this. But is there a strategy to really take this forward in terms of putting the Israelis under more pressure to recognize the need for a political track, a two-state solution? Can this be used in a more meaningful way to kind of leverage political change and reform in the Palestinian system, which is also a necessary component of moving forward? So this is a symbolic step in many respects, but it's a first important step from the perspective of some key European states, and it could well kind of be the beginning process of more Europeans and maybe even more important Europeans coming alongside this.
Yossi, your views on that. Is this the beginning of something? And if so, what is it the beginning of?
I'm not sure whether that is the beginning of something. I can tell you something about what happened in 1999. We had to end the negotiations towards the permanent agreement by May the 4th, 1999, according to the Oslo stages. Now, nothing happened on that date, and the prime minister on the Israeli side was somebody by the name of Bibi Netanyahu. And there were Palestinian leaders who said if by that date there is no development or nothing will happen, we will declare unilaterally a Palestinian state. And there were European countries who thought that they should follow that idea. And there was a Beilin conference in, I think, February 1999, in which the idea was to declare that if in few months there is no development, there will be a decision of the EU to support a Palestinian state. I went to Yasser Arafat and I talked with him about that. I was then in the opposition, and I asked him what does he think about it. And he said the following thing: Yossi, you have to know, it is important for me when the world supports the Palestinian cause. But what I'm worried about is that it is not enough. Namely, we already had, and I remember the number, 123 countries which recognized the Palestinian state since November 1988, when the Palestinians changed their mind about a two-state solution. Now, what I'm worried about is once the world recognizes the Palestinian state, the world will be satisfied with what it did and will not go ahead with that. It is not enough for me. What I need is peace with you. I need a two-state solution, but a real one. So I'm not sure that it helps me. That is exactly what Arafat told me then. I mean, it is not the same situation. 30 years or more passed since then. And of course, we cannot compare it. But nevertheless, one should remember something like that, meaning that even I think that even if today...
So Arafat didn't want state to be an empty shell.
A good sign for the Palestinians. It will not be enough. And it might be a substitute for real stages, like pushing for peace, for real peace, pushing the two sides towards peace.
Julien Khan, I see you nodding. Sorry, go ahead. Let's do Khan first, just because the nodding was strongest there.
Well, I thought what Yossi Beilin said was very interesting and very true. I mean, I've thought a lot about this, and I can't help but think that the diplomatic approach, the building up of resolutions demanding an end to the occupation, and indeed the strategy of pursuing recognitions for Palestine, in one way, this has been a failure for the Palestinians, because those things have not granted the Palestinians one single square inch of territory, ever. It is the direct process between the Israelis and the Palestinians that have agreed that, but also actions by the Palestinians, such as the Intifada on the ground, that triggered Israel to actually engage in those processes. And I think that should give us some cause for reflection. It's very, very clear to me that the only thing that is going to drive us towards a two-state solution, or any political solution that guarantees the rights of the Palestinians as well as the Israelis at the end of it, is pressure on Israel. You can have the entire General Assembly recognize Palestine. You can give Palestine full membership of the UN. It will not give them control of the whole West Bank, control of Gaza, or an international system of administration of Jerusalem.
Julien?
Yes, I'm very much in agreement with all of that. And I think my sense is, and my question is this the beginning of some kind of European strategy or not? And I think what has been said by the two other guests is exactly to the right point. In and of itself, recognition will do very little. And the question is whether there is an underlying strategy that can increase the pressure on Israel to take the necessary steps to move towards a political track. Whether the Europeans are prepared to roll up their sleeves and engage more honestly and more coherently in some of the steps that are needed to leverage Palestinian political reform. I mean, these are the key dimensions that will create the space or not for a process. I agree with Kana that this question of international pressure and isolation is critical, not just for the Israeli government, but I think also for the Israeli public in terms of showing them that there is no viable alternative if they want to be accepted and a stakeholder moving forward. But the same for the Palestinians, that they need to recognize that there is a viable alternative to armed resistance. But that also necessitates them now taking the steps to change and to reform their internal makeup, which has obviously been a huge handicap and offered Israel, in a sense, an easy pathway away from political talks for so long.
Okay, so I've asked all of you about statehood, and you've pretty much all answered by framing it in the wider context of negotiations, peace for push, and how do you get to a long-term solution. So in that case, Yossi, let me go back to you and ask you this. Because you were an initiator in the Oslo peace process 30 years ago, it failed, it didn't work, but it remains the most significant, most comprehensive push for peace in the history of this conflict. What lessons did you learn about that and about its failure that you think could potentially be applied today?
Well, I believe that the most important thing is that you can make peace if both sides are eager to make peace. I'm not sure about the third party. It may help. It may suggest ideas. I don't think that a third party is going to impose neither on the Palestinians, not on the Israelis, peace. And that is why, in my view, the most important thing is that the Israeli government will change. I mean, if you have other people, and you have today an alternative in Israel, on the Palestinian side, with all the difficulties between Hamas and the PLO or Fatah, and the old age of the president, I think that President Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas is ready for peace. Is a big supporter of the two-state solution. I'm not waiting for his replacement, although
meaning
nobody
you're not
will
expecting
be
it to happen.
And he is a partner. He is a partner for I believe. Even for Gantz, if you remember, Gantz as a defense minister invited him to his home in Israel, and there was a big fuss about how can you invite Abu Mazen to your home, but he did it. I believe that in Europe there is the experience and the knowledge which may help us a lot to get to the two-state solution. And regretfully, Europe was not involved in the last years. In the past, it was involved in 80 with the Venice Declaration, if you remember, and other things. In the last years, it did not happen.
So you're saying the major stumbling block here is the Israeli leadership, the current government that is in place. And what would need to happen for things to change in any kind of significant way would be for the Israeli political landscape really to change. But Julien, the leaders, whether it's Netanyahu, his coalition partners, they have zero incentive to call new elections. So, and we've been in this sort of stasis for several months, right? Because they could potentially lose seats and lose power if they called new elections. So do we all sort of just cross our arms and wait for the clock to run out on this government, which won't be for several years?
Well, I defer very much to Yossi on his read on Israeli politics. I think it's clear that Netanyahu fears support of the government because of the kind of personal costs, not just in terms of him being forced from power, but potentially having to face new trials. So he's clearly desperate to stay in power. But I think there is also a big question for the moment of how much the alternatives would really offer a new pathway towards peace. Yossi has suggested that the Gantz is in a better place, and I think for most people, anyone but Netanyahu and his coalition would be progress here. But from outside of Israel, there is a strong sense that actually there is a degree of alignment amongst the main parties and amongst the wider population that now is not the time for peace with Palestinians, that there isn't desire, there isn't a willingness to move towards a two-state solution. And actually, by beating the drums of war and the kind of right-wing rhetoric, you strengthen your political position. So I think, there's a lot of hope in a new government. I think for a lot of us outside of Israel, there's a lot of concern and skepticism there, and hence the sense that actually a lot of this is going to have to involve increased international pressure on Israel to convince both the political elite and the wider population the way forward in terms of their own status in the world and their own relations with the West and the global South will be dependent on making the kind of willingness to move in towards a political track that others are asking. And of course, the US is tying that to a Saudi normalization deal. So they're doing that in their own way. But I think everyone is very much leading into the idea now that you have to pressure the Israelis and you have to show them the cost in terms of isolation and non-deal making with other states if there is to be a shift here.
Khan, if I bring statehood back into this conversation, there has been just a few days ago, 2 days ago, a very concrete, measurable impact of the recognition of Palestinian statehood. And it is when the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court sought arrest warrants against Hamas leaders, yes, but also Israeli leaders, namely the prime minister and the defense minister. That could not have happened, and he could not be seeking those arrest warrants if Palestine had not been recognized as a member state of the court. So this is one direct, clear, impactful way in which statehood does move the needle.
That's totally right. Without statehood, we wouldn't have the ICC called for prosecution. But this kind of incrementalist approach of seeking greater international recognition, membership of UN bodies, international bodies, that kind of thing, is all very well. It's a good strategy to pursue, but it will not give Palestine an actual state. What gives you a state is the country from which you want to become a state, secede from, if you like, though Palestine is not seceding from it. I'm just using a figure of speech, not seceding from Israel, has to accept that you will become a state. Israel holds the key here. This is why there is, as Julien says, growing international consensus that there needs to be pressure on Israel to make this happen. My question is, will there be such pressure? The Europeans have totally failed to put pressure on Israel in past decades to leave the occupied territories, as they have been required to do for a very long time. And the US, when talks have happened, have taken the side of the Israelis. And there is no sign that the US is prepared to put any meaningful pressure on Israel to do the right thing, whether the Biden administration or a future Trump administration.
Okay, so there's really a 10,000-foot question in here somewhere. And Yossi, this will go to you. You mentioned earlier that peace happens if both sides want it. Israel's strategy right now is to occupy part of Palestine, the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and to blockade the other part, Gaza. I'm not sure that many people in Israel today would say, apart from the extreme right, okay, because their policy is annexation, settle the land, drive out the Palestinians. They have said as much. We know what they think. Apart from the extreme right, I'm not sure there are that many Israelis who would say this is working for us. Is there a momentum? Is there a critical mass of Israelis who think we need to try something different because occupation and blockading has resulted in this?
No question. No question. I mean, you see it in the numbers. I mean, there are surveys, ideological surveys and partisan surveys, but you see that Netanyahu himself is very unpopular. I think that he was never so unpopular in his long political career. His party became much smaller in the polls. People do not want to annex the West Bank. For sure not Gaza. So I think that a different government in Israel will be much more relevant for most of the Israelis. And I can tell you about the ICC. In the ICC, this decision, and I was one of those who wanted Israel to join the ICC, in December 2000, but regretfully did not happen. But, and as you may know, it was Israelis and Jews from abroad who were the biggest pushers for the establishment of the ICC. But the ICC problem is that the decision of the prosecutor actually strengthens, at least for a while, Netanyahu. Because people, even if they are not admirers of Netanyahu, would not like to see their prime minister in such a situation, mainly because it was actually connected to the accusations against Hamas. Even if it was not equal and the Hamas accusations are more serious, still the fact that both sides, as if it was balanced, were accused, made many Israelis who do not support Netanyahu to support him. So I don't see these things changing the idea. What can change the situation? For example, President Biden has a plan, which is a strategic alliance. It is the release of the hostages. It is an alliance with Saudi Arabia and negotiations on the basis of a Palestinian state. But he leaked it, or his people leaked it, to the New York Times and the Washington Post some months ago. He never actually said it publicly. And I believe that at least for him now to stand up and say this is an American offer to both sides, that might have a much bigger impact on the Israeli public opinion than the sanctions or things like that. I'm not saying that sanctions do not have an impact, but sometimes they are having the counter impact. And I think that thinking about punishments is the wrong way. The right way is to put an option and to see who supported, and to create, even in Israel itself, a real debate. Today, it is difficult to have a debate because the offer of President Biden, or perhaps in the future of the Europeans, is not on the agenda at all.
All right, gentlemen, we have to run. That's all the time we have for today, but I really value your time. Thank you very much for your perspectives and your analysis today. Yossi, Beilin, Julien, Barnes-Dacey, and Con Ross, thank you for joining us, and thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, our handle @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.